My name is Margaret, and I'm 62 years old. For 34 years, I believed that what happened inside my house was private. I believed that the man I married was complicated, not cruel. I believed that if I was just patient enough, quiet enough, careful enough, things would eventually get better. And for 34 years, I was wrong about all of it. What happened the afternoon my sister-in-law drove me to the doctor's office for what I told her was a routine checkup. That's the afternoon everything changed. Not because of anything I did, not because I finally found the courage I'd been searching for, but because of something my doctor said that made my husband go absolutely still on the other end of that phone. I watched his face change from across the room, and for the first time in 3 decades, I saw fear in his eyes instead of the rage I had learned to navigate like a minefield. But before I tell you what she said, before I tell you why those words cracked my husband's composure wide open, I need you to understand how I got there. How a woman with a master's degree, a 30-year career as a school librarian, 2 grown children, and a house full of photographs from family vacations ended up sitting on a paper-covered examination table with 3 broken ribs and a story she was too afraid to tell. I need you to hit that like button right now and subscribe to this channel, because what I'm about to share is something I kept secret for 34 years. And I'm sharing it today because somewhere out there, there's a woman, maybe a woman your age, maybe a woman your mother's age, who thinks she's too old, too set in her ways, too far in to get out. This is for her. This is for you, if that's you. I met my husband at a church potluck in Lexington, Kentucky in the spring of 1990. I was 28 years old, newly hired at the public library system. Idealistic and independent and completely unprepared for a man like him. He was 31, a building contractor with his own small company, broad-shouldered and quiet in a way I mistook for depth. He listened to me talk and looked at me like I was the most interesting person in any room. I had never experienced that kind of focused attention before, and I confused it for love. We dated for 14 months and married in June of 1991. I wore my grandmother's pearl earrings and carried white peonies, and I thought I was beginning the best chapter of my life. The controlling behavior started so slowly that I didn't have a name for it for years. He wanted to know where I was going before I went. He didn't like certain friends of mine thought they were too opinionated, too much of a bad influence. He made comments about my spending, even when I was earning my own salary, even when I was buying groceries. Small things. Things I told myself were just his personality. Things I explained away as the product of his own difficult upbringing, his father's absence, his mother's strictness. His mother, Evelyn, was a formidable woman who had raised 3 children alone after her husband left, and she wore that sacrifice like armor. She adored her oldest son in the particular way that some mothers adore a boy they've decided the world owes something to. She was never warm to me. Not at the wedding, not when our daughter Claire was born, not when our son Thomas came along 2 years later. She was civil in the way a person is civil to a hotel employee, transactional, distant, vaguely dismissive. And my husband took every criticism she ever made of me and absorbed it as truth. Evelyn passed away in 2015, which I am ashamed to admit brought me something close to relief. But by then, her voice had already taken up permanent residence in my husband's head. I want to be honest with you about the early and middle years of our marriage because I think it matters. There were stretches of time that were genuinely good. He could be funny. He could be generous. When our children were small, he coached Thomas's little league team and never missed a single one of Claire's school performances. There were holidays and anniversaries and ordinary Tuesday evenings that felt warm and real. That's the part that makes it so confusing when people ask why I stayed. Because it wasn't bad all the time. It was bad enough of the time that I was always bracing for it, always monitoring the temperature in the room, always adjusting my behavior to manage his moods. But there were enough good moments threaded through the bad ones that I kept telling myself the balance might shift, that the good was winning. I now understand that maintaining just enough goodness to keep a person hopeful is one of the oldest tools in the abuser's kit. The physical violence didn't begin until we were both retired. That timing matters, and I think about it often. For 30 years, I had my job. 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. I was in that library helping children find stories and helping adults navigate the world of information, and in that building I was competent and respected and completely myself. My work gave me an identity outside of him. And when I left for the office every morning, I left the tension in the house behind me for a few hours and breathed. When I retired in the spring of 2019, I lost that exit. We were both home, all day, every day, and without the natural separations the workday had imposed on us, the dynamic between us shifted into something I had not experienced before. He was used to being the one who came and went, used to being the one whose schedule the household organized itself around. Suddenly I was there constantly, and it seemed to unsettle him in a way I didn't understand at first. The first time he hurt me, I told myself it was a one-time thing. We'd argued about money, specifically about a weekend trip I wanted to take with my friend Ruth to visit her daughter in Nashville. He didn't want me to go, said we couldn't afford it, which was not true, and I said so calmly but clearly. And he grabbed my arm so hard I had a bruise for 2 weeks, shaped exactly like his hand. I wore a cardigan in July to hide it. After that, he apologized, was attentive and kind for several weeks, bought me flowers, which he hadn't done in years. I told myself it was a crisis point we passed through, a pressure valve that had released. I did not tell anyone, not Claire, not Thomas, not my closest friend Ruth. I was 60 years old. I had been married for nearly 3 decades. I had a certain life, a certain standing, a certain story about who I was and who my husband was. The idea of revising that story was more than I could face. But the pressure valve, once opened, does not stay closed. 6 months later, it was worse. And 6 months after that, worse still. A shove against the kitchen counter that cracked 2 ribs, which I told the urgent care clinic I'd gotten falling down the back steps. A fist that caught the side of my face during an argument about whether Thomas and his wife were visiting for Easter, which I told my daughter I'd walked into an open cabinet door in the dark. She looked at me in a way that made me look away. She didn't push. I didn't let her. The thing I want you to understand, because I know some of you are thinking it, why didn't she just leave? Is that leaving is not a decision you make once. It's a decision you have to build toward, brick by brick, while the person you're trying to leave is actively dismantling whatever foundation you're trying to stand on. He controlled our finances. My retirement income went into a joint account he managed. My name was not on the mortgage, a detail that had seemed unimportant when we bought the house 20 years ago, and which now felt like a trapdoor beneath my feet. I didn't know if I could survive financially on my own. I didn't know if anyone would believe me. I had spent 34 years presenting a particular version of my marriage to the world, and I was afraid that dismantling that version would cost me things I couldn't afford to lose. My children's understanding, my community, my sense of myself as a person who had lived a coherent life. I also want you to hear this. Clearly, I was afraid of him. Not abstractly. Physically afraid, in my body, in a way that is very hard to describe to someone who has not felt it. The particular way your nervous system reorganizes itself around a person's unpredictability. The way you stop being fully present in your own life. Because part of your mind is always listening, always calculating, always running the numbers on what you said and how he's receiving it, and what the odds are that tonight will be a bad night. That was my life. And I had convinced myself it was simply the life I had. My doctor, Patricia Holloway, had been my physician for 15 years. She was a few years older than me, matter-of-fact and precise, the kind of doctor who remembered everything you'd ever told her and filed it quietly away. She had seen me through my mother's death, through my own breast cancer scare in 2014, through the ordinary accumulations of a woman's body moving through its 60s. I trusted her. After the kitchen counter incident, she had asked me carefully and directly how I had gotten the fractures. I gave her the story about the back steps. She wrote it in my chart. She didn't press me, but she looked at me in a particular way that I understood and ignored simultaneously. The third time I came to her office with injuries that didn't match my explanations, she was done waiting for me to be ready. It was a Tuesday in October, 2 years ago. My husband's younger sister, Diane, had driven me to the appointment because my husband had told her I'd had a fall and couldn't drive. Diane was devoted to her brother in the same uncritical way their mother had been, had always seemed to view me as an obstacle to the sibling intimacy she'd preferred before I existed. She was in the waiting room while I was examined. My husband was at home, but reachable by phone. Diane had his number ready, as if she'd been briefed to keep him informed. Dr. Sells. Holloway came into the examination room, saw my face, a split lip that had mostly healed, bruising along my jaw that I'd covered with foundation, and sat down across from me in a way that told me this appointment was going to be different from the others. She didn't ask me what happened right away. She did the examination quietly, professionally, and when she had documented everything, she set her clipboard down and said, very evenly, that she needed to speak with me about something before I left. She said she'd like to step out for just a moment to ask Diane to wait a few more minutes, and that she'd be right back. When she came back, she was alone. She closed the door. She sat down again. And then she said something that changed the entire shape of the next hour, the next month, the rest of my life. She said, "Margaret, I need you to listen to me carefully. I've already done something this morning that I want to make sure you know about before anyone else says anything to you." She said it calmly, the same tone she'd used to explain a change in medication. Under Kentucky law, a physician is a mandated reporter when there is reasonable suspicion of abuse or neglect in a patient over 60. That's the law for elder abuse, and it applies here. I filed a report with Adult Protective Services this morning before you arrived, based on your visit history in my records. That report is already submitted. It's already in the system. There is nothing that can be done to unfile it, or to change what's in it, or to prevent APS from following up. Not by you, not by anyone else. I want you to understand that, because I want you to know that what you say to me right now doesn't determine whether or not action is taken. Action is already being taken. What it determines is whether or not I can help you. I stared at her. I did not fully understand what I was hearing. She said, "I also want you to know that I called your husband from the front desk just a few minutes ago. I told him that I needed to do some additional testing and that it would be a while longer. And I told him very clearly that I had already submitted the mandatory elder abuse report and that APS would be contacting him." She paused. "I wanted him to know that it's already done, that there's no version of this conversation where it gets undone." I asked her why she told him that. She said, "Because I've been watching you manage his reactions for 3 years, and I needed him to understand that managing you right now won't change the outcome. I wanted him to feel exactly as powerless as you've been feeling, and I needed you to have this room, this conversation, without that weight on you." I didn't speak for what felt like a long time. I could hear the ordinary sounds of the office outside the door, phones ringing, someone laughing at the front desk, the world continuing in its normal, unaware way. Then Dr. Holloway reached across and put her hand over mine, and she said, "You are 62 years old. You have 30 or 40 more years ahead of you. Tell me the truth so I can help you use them." And I did. I told her everything. Not in the careful, edited way I told partial truths to partial confidants over the years. All of it, beginning with the hand around my arm in July of 2019, moving forward through every incident I could name, arriving finally at the evening 3 weeks ago when I had said something at dinner that displeased him, and he had put both hands on my shoulders and slammed me back against the wall hard enough to rattle the photograph of Claire's college graduation that hung there. Dr. Tummy. Holloway listened to all of it without interrupting. She took notes. When I was finished, she told me that what I had described was a consistent pattern of domestic violence and that I had the same rights to protection and legal remedy as anyone else, regardless of my age, regardless of how long the marriage had lasted, regardless of what I had told people before this moment. She called the police herself from that examination room while I sat there. She stayed with me the entire time. She explained to the officer on the phone what she had observed, what I had disclosed, what was in my chart. 2 officers arrived within 20 minutes. While we waited, she stepped out once more. Later, she told me what happened in that waiting room. She had gone to find Diane and had told her in the same measured, professional voice she used for everything that I was going to be a while longer, that there had been some findings that required attention, and that she had filed the mandatory elder abuse report and notified my husband. Diane had gotten to her feet immediately, reaching for her phone. Dr. Holloway had said, gently but unmistakably, that she would need Diane to stay in the waiting room for now, as the police were on their way and would need to speak with anyone who had knowledge of the patient's home situation. Diane sat back down. When the officers arrived and went to speak with her, Diane did exactly what I imagined she thought was helpful. She explained that her brother was a good man, that I was emotional and sometimes confused, that I'd always been clumsy, that he had simply lost patience on a few occasions because I could be difficult to live with. She said all of this to two police officers conducting a domestic violence investigation, apparently without understanding that she was describing a pattern of abuse and confirming that she was aware of it. One of the officers told me later that Diane's statement was among the most inadvertently useful corroborating accounts he had encountered in his years on the force. She had admitted, in her own words, that incidents had occurred, that she had witnessed my husband's behavior, and that she had attributed the results of that behavior to my personal failings. She had handed them a confession wrapped in a defense. My husband was arrested at our house that afternoon. He was charged with second-degree assault and elder abuse under Kentucky statute, which carries serious penalties including significant prison time. He did not resist. Diane called me 3 times from the police station, and I did not answer any of them. I called my daughter Claire from Dr. Holloway's office, still sitting in that examination room, still wearing my paper gown. She answered on the second ring. When I told her what had happened, the real version, all of it, she went silent in a way that I recognized as her trying not to fall apart while she figured out what to do next. Then she said, "Mom, I'm coming. I'm already putting on my shoes." She drove 4 hours from Cincinnati and arrived at the hospital, where I had been admitted overnight for observation, at nearly 10 o'clock that night. She stood in the doorway of my room for just a moment when she first saw me, and I watched her take in my face, the IV in my arm, the monitor, and I watched her decide to hold herself together for my sake. She came to the bed and held my hand and didn't say anything for a long time. Eventually, she said, "How long?" I told her. She pressed her lips together very tightly and looked at the ceiling. Then she looked at me again and said, "It's over now. You're coming home with me." My son Thomas flew in from Denver 2 days later. His reaction was different from Claire's, louder, angrier, directed at himself as much as anyone else. He kept saying he should have seen it, should have known, should have done something. I told him the same thing I want to tell anyone watching this who loves a person in an abusive relationship. I hid it from you, deliberately, skillfully, for years. The failure to see it was mine to own, not his. He didn't accept that easily, but over time, I think he heard me. I was discharged from the hospital and went home with Claire. I have not been back to that house since, and I do not intend to return. My attorney, a patient and tenacious woman named Donna, who works with a legal aid organization in Lexington specializing in domestic violence cases, filed for divorce and a permanent restraining order within the first week. She also helped me untangle the financial situation, which was complicated in the way that 34 years of one person controlling the resources always leaves things complicated. But it was not untangleable. That was the lesson I kept learning in those early months. Things that felt impossible from inside that house were, from outside it, merely difficult. My husband's attorney tried to frame the charges as a misunderstanding, as an overreaction by a doctor who had misread the situation, as the product of my confusion and instability. The prosecutor did not find these arguments compelling. The mandatory elder abuse report, my medical records spanning 3 years, Diane's inadvertent confession, and my own testimony made for a case that his attorney eventually advised him to stop fighting. He pleaded guilty to second-degree assault and elder abuse. He was sentenced to 4 years in a state correctional facility, with 3 years of supervised probation to follow, mandatory counseling, and a permanent restraining order prohibiting any contact with me. It was not enough. I want to say that plainly. 4 years is not 34 years. 4 years is not the total of every Sunday morning I spent in a state of low-grade dread, every vacation photograph taken in front of a performance of happiness, every bruise explained away to a mirror before I left the house. But it was accountability. And accountability, when you have lived without it for as long as I had, is not a small thing. Diane attempted to contact me several times after the sentencing. I did not respond. She sent a letter to Claire's address that I read once and then handed to my attorney. I do not wish her any specific harm. I simply have no interest in maintaining a relationship with someone whose loyalty to her brother was stronger than her regard for the woman he hurt. Some doors close permanently. I've made my peace with that. The first months after leaving were harder than I had anticipated, which surprised me because I had spent so long imagining that leaving would feel like emerging from underwater. In some ways, it did. But grief doesn't follow a logical schedule. I grieved the marriage I had believed I was in for 34 years. The version that existed in Christmas card photos and in the stories I told people at library fundraisers. That marriage was a fiction, and I knew it. But I had lived inside that fiction long enough that losing it felt like a loss, and I had to let myself mourn it before I could move forward. My therapist, whom I started seeing 3 weeks after leaving, helped me understand that this is normal, that leaving an abusive situation doesn't automatically feel like freedom, that the nervous system needs time to believe in its own safety. That waking up in a quiet house without bracing for the temperature of someone else's mood is a skill you have to relearn. Because you have spent years unlearning it, I relearned it slowly, some mornings faster than others. At 62, I built a new daily life in my daughter's house and then in an apartment of my own across town from her when I was ready. I resumed things I had set aside without fully realizing it. The book club I had quietly withdrawn from because my husband found my opinions about fiction annoying, the twice-weekly walks with Ruth that had tapered off over the years because he didn't like me spending time away. The small pleasures of choosing what to eat and when to eat it and whether to leave the television on or not without conducting an internal risk assessment first. I want you to understand what I mean when I say that, not the big freedoms, though those matter enormously, but the small ones. The ones you don't even notice you've lost until they come back. The ability to answer the phone without a knot in your stomach. The ability to be in a room by yourself without waiting for a footstep in the hallway. The ability to disagree with someone and not experience it as a threat to your physical safety. Those are the freedoms that told me, day by day, that I was going to be all right. I began speaking about what had happened to me about 8 months after I left. It started as a conversation with a social worker who ran the support group I had joined, who asked if I would be willing to share my experience with a new member who was older and felt that no one in the group would understand her situation. I sat with that woman for 2 hours. I told her my story and she told me hers, and at the end of it she said, I thought I was too old for anyone to take this seriously, and I told her that was exactly what he wanted her to think, because an abuser is never more secure than when his victim believes that no one will come for her. That conversation changed something in me. It gave my experience a direction beyond my own survival. I want to speak now to the women watching this who are over 60, because there are things about being in an abusive relationship at this stage of life that are specific and that don't get talked about enough. The shame is different. You've been married a long time, and the longer you have been married, the more the failure of that marriage seems like a reflection on you rather than on him. You may have adult children who have grown up believing a certain story about your family. You may be financially entangled in ways that feel impossible to separate. You may be afraid that at your age, you lack the energy or the resources to start over. You may have internalized, somewhere deep, the idea that women of a certain generation simply endured certain things as the cost of the life they chose. None of that is true. None of it is insurmountable. And none of it means you deserve what is being done to you. I also want you to know something specific about the law, because it was the thing that saved me and that I wish I had known years earlier. In most states in this country, there are elder abuse statutes that provide additional protections for adults over 60. Medical professionals, social workers, and a number of other categories of people are mandated reporters under these laws, meaning that if they have reasonable cause to suspect abuse, they are legally required to report it regardless of your consent. Your doctor may have more power to help you than you realize. Your doctor may already be watching, already documenting, already waiting for the moment when she can act. When you go to your next appointment, even if you are not ready to say everything, know that the person across from you may be an ally who is waiting for you to give her the opening she needs. You don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to take one step. Doctor, Holloway and I have coffee together twice a year. She is, without qualification, one of the most important people in my life. What she did that afternoon in her office, the calm, strategic, perfectly timed way she told my husband that the process was already in motion, that there was nothing left to control, required both professional courage and a particular kind of intelligence that I don't think gets celebrated the way it deserves. She didn't overpower him. She didn't raise her voice. She simply made him understand that the ground had shifted beneath his feet and that no amount of pressure on me would put it back. I asked her once whether she had been certain it would work, whether she had been afraid. She thought about it for a moment and then said that she had been afraid a little, that there was always risk in confronting an abusive person's sense of control directly, but that she had been more afraid of the alternative, of sending me back to that house one more time, of seeing me again in 6 months with injuries I would blame on the back steps. She said that at a certain point, watching and waiting and gently suggesting becomes its own kind of failure. And she had decided she was done with that kind of failure. I think about those words often. I am 62 years old. I live alone in an apartment I chose myself, decorated myself, and pay for with money that is entirely mine. I have a standing Sunday dinner with Claire and her family, and a standing Thursday walk with Ruth, and an ongoing argument with Thomas about whether I need to upgrade my phone, which I am thoroughly enjoying losing on purpose. I have my books and my garden and my morning coffee on a porch where no one is going to appear in the doorway with a clenched jaw and a question about where I've been. I am not going to pretend it doesn't still mark me. I am not going to tell you that 62 is the same as 28, that I can simply reset and begin again as if none of it happened. The years are in me. The wariness is still in my nervous system, slowly quieting. I still occasionally catch myself calculating, assessing a person's mood before speaking, preparing to make myself small. I notice it now, which is progress. I name it, which is more. I am working, at 62, on learning to occupy my own life without apology, without constant alertness, without the particular exhaustion of a woman who has been making herself manageable for decades. It is, it turns out, very good work. The best work I have ever done. If you're watching this and you recognize yourself in this story, I want you to hear me the way I needed to be heard in that examination room. Your age is not a reason to stay. Your length of marriage is not a reason to stay. Your financial situation, your children's feelings, your community's assumptions, your own deep and understandable desire to have lived a different story. None of those are reasons to stay. They are reasons he has used to make you feel that staying is the only option. They are not true. There are people who will help you. There are legal protections you may not know about. There are doctors and social workers and advocates whose entire professional purpose is to help you find a way out of exactly the situation you are in. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can call 1-800-799-7233 or text START to 8818-788 or use the chat function on their website if calling is not safe. If you are over 60, the Elder Care Locator at 1-800-677-1116 can connect you to local resources specific to elder abuse. These services exist. They are for you. Reaching for them is not weakness. It is the first step toward the rest of your life. And if you're watching this and you love someone who may be in this situation, please pay attention. The person you are worried about may have spent years building an explanation for every bruise, an excuse for every canceled plan, a reason for every time she flinched. She may be very good at it. Please keep watching anyway. Please keep the door open. Please tell her, once, clearly, without pressure, that you see her, that you believe her, and that there is a place for her when she is ready. And then keep the door open, because the day she is ready, she will need someone to walk through it with her. My name is Margaret. I am 62 years old. I spent 34 years in a marriage that looked, from the outside, like a life. And 3 years ago, On an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, a doctor who had been paying attention for 15 years sat across from me in a small examination room and told me the truth, that what was happening to me had already been seen, already been named, and that there was nothing left to hide. She gave me back something I had lost so gradually I hadn't noticed it was gone, the understanding that I was worth protecting. Not someday, not when things got bad enough, not when I finally did something right enough to deserve it. Now, as I was, at 60 years old, bruised and frightened and ashamed, sitting on a paper-covered table in a doctor's office on a Tuesday in October. Worth protecting. Right now. Exactly as I was. If you are still watching, please leave me a comment telling me where you are and that you heard this. I read every single one. And if this story touched something in you, please share it. Because somewhere there is a woman who has been telling herself that no one will come for her. Let's make sure she knows that's not true. Thank you for being here. Please, if you need help, reach out today. Your life is not over. It is waiting.